Welcome to the State of the Nation Sport. And today, a wonderful guest, a man I've known for many years, a really fantastic human being, Mr. Nick Mallett. Nick, welcome to State of the Nation Sport.
Yeah, it's very nice to be here. Nice to see you again, too.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, we are in our nice new studio in Parkhurst. So welcome aboard.
Cheers, thanks.
You happen to be the second person ever being interviewed.
Yeah, I know. Hugh Page was here earlier, and he's a good mate of mine as well. So I'm very happy that you've invited me as the second.
Yeah, well, Nick, let's start at the beginning. The first time I ever saw you, you wouldn't know this. You were breaking my heart, playing for Western Province against Transvaal, and taking on a ferocious team almost by yourself. I remember clearly that you guys won in a close game, and you scored a try where you took about 5 guys over the line with you, Nick.
I can't remember that. I can't. Well, that 82 to 84, I remember, was a very strong period of rugby for Western Province.
Yes.
And it's just a fact in rugby that if you are surrounded by good players, it improves your own game. So I had Tiaan Stoffberg, Rob Lowe, Devan Serfontein, the Duplessis brothers. I mean, it was a very strong side. So I was an Ike, but playing with a whole lot of Marties. I was very lucky, and we had a couple of good, quite a few. I think we won 4 Currie Cups in a row, and they went on to win 5, I think.
Yeah, 5. I remember it sticks in my heart because I think 2 of them were against Transvaal. But Nick, you always seem to kind of like, there's been a sort of a cloud of controversy that followed you, eh?
I think in rugby in South Africa in the 70s and 80s was very much Afrikaner dominated. It came, the Broederbond had played quite a strong part in it, and the real strength was Tukkies against Stellenbosch. Those two were, it was almost like a north versus south, a massive confrontation between 2 Afrikaans cultures. And I wasn't involved in that at all. I'd gone to English-speaking schools and went to UCT. But I was very fortunate at UCT to also play with some good players. There were Peter Whip and Chris Pope, both Springboks. We had a really good pack of forwards, Dougie Mather, Dougie Claxton, Butch Ducher, all played for Western Province. And we managed in 1976 to beat Stellenbosch in the intervarsity. It was the first time it was replayed. Having had about 17 years, it was out of the schedule because of politics, and UCT came back. We played at Newlands in front of 30,000 people, and I had a good game that day. I was 19 years old, and Donnie Craven, I remember, was watching. He was coaching the Stellenbosch side, and we had Doc Moss coaching us. He was a brilliant, went on to coach the Springboks. So, that kicked off my sort of provincial career. Morne du Plessis was playing captain of the Springboks and playing number 8 for Western Province, but if Piet Veldsmann or it was Jan Boland Kutsi ever got injured, I sneaked in on the flank, and initially I was just a young guy getting involved, and then but obviously being an English-speaking guy, you have a different education from the Afrikaners. I think the Afrikaners tend to be very respectful of their elders. Obviously the church is very powerful in their culture, so rugby and the church went hand in hand, and also the older you were, it was even if you were 30, if you were a 20-year-old, you called the guy 30 or 35, you called him so I wasn't like that at all. I came from my father was a headmaster of a private school in Cape Town, Bishops, and we've always been taught to question, so even in class, you'd be asked a question, and then you would debate it and come out with some answers. So as a rugby player, when I went from a Doc Moss who used to coach like that, English-speaking guy, and UCT, and we'd debate moves and amongst the players themselves, suddenly I went into an Afrikaans setup where the guys told you what to do. And sometimes I didn't agree with what they were telling me to do. And so I'd say, well, explain to me why. And they've never been questioned before. Their answer was, because I tell you to, because I say so. And, that rubbed up the wrong way a little bit. So, it was always, all through my rugby career, I would bump into these autocratic Afrikaners, and I'd generally tell them, no, I'm going to do it my way.
And I remember this period quite clearly, because obviously the media were like, who is this guy who's got such a big mouth, such a lot to say? And you quickly built up a bit of a reputation of being a bit outspoken, let's put it that way.
Well, I always thought in rugby, I wasn't the fastest, I wasn't the biggest, but I had a lot of a very competitive nature. So if you're playing against people as a 19-year-old, you're playing against the Springbok captain, Morné du Plessis was playing for Villagers, and you can't apologize for being there. In order to try and get ahead, you've got to try and play better than him. So even there was a game in 1976 we played against Villagers for UCT, and Morné was playing number 8, and I was playing number 8 for UCT. And they had Roy McCullum in their side. They had, I think, H.O. de Villiers was playing. They had a really decent team. And we beat them comprehensively. I think the score was close to 40 points. We beat them. And just cheeky, at the back of the line-out with 5 minutes to go, I said to him, aren't you the Springbok captain? I mean, look at the score. It's not great, is it? And, that sort of thing, you've just got to believe in yourself. And sometimes other people, you've got to make an impression on them. And I was convinced that I could make it. I had different talents. I was a cricketer, so I had good hands. I understood lines of running. And as I said, very competitive. So I fought my way into the team and managed to get there.
And I'm going to do a little bit of, I'm going to explain to people what some of these things mean. When Nick says he was competitive, one thing he left out was that he was also a very good boxer. And that was very much part of rugby at that time. And you weren't scared, let's put it that way.
I was probably hit more than I ever hit anyone else. I mean, I remember Kevin de Klerk, was tramping all over me at the bottom of a ruck, and I complained, and he said, just, you got to put up with it. You'll be with the big boys now. And I had a couple of ribs broken by Mona van Heerden when he cleared out a ruck. So it was tough. Clifford Etzebeth broke my nose in a game for UCT against Police. So in those, in the 70s and early 80s, there wasn't TMO, no touch judges who could put their flags out.
Yeah.
It was, if the referee's back was turned, you tended to get whacked. And a lot of intimidation, So if you were playing for UCT against Stellenbosch, you'd be playing against 14 guys who played in the Western Province team. And you'd be this only guy at UCT who played for Western Province. And of course, those 14 guys then, want to get into your face. So, you had to stand up for yourself. But as I said, I took a few more knocks probably than I gave.
And just while we're on there, we're gonna pick this up. We're gonna continue in a minute. But the game now has been, one could say, cleaned up, almost sanitized.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In your opinion, you've played there, but you're still very involved in the modern game now through the commentating, which you'll get through and get to in a minute. What do you think? Do you think the game's better for the cleaning up, or do you think that was very much a part of the game? Because, we had a similar, you have a similar thing in cricket, without the helmet, with the helmet, it's a totally different game.
Very much so.
What's your view on rugby?
So I think every era, you've got to judge on its own.
Yes.
So I look at our era in the 1970s, 1980s, and it was what it was. Television started at that time. I remember, I don't know if you remember, but they used to black out the area that the game was playing, so the spectators would still go there, and then they'd show it up. If it was played in Cape Town, they'd show it in Pretoria or in Joburg or anywhere else, but not in a certain kilometers around Cape Town to ensure that the spectators go. Things like that. It was very much a game which you played it was an amateur game. You practiced in the evenings, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday.
After work.
Yeah, after work, exactly, or after being a student. And then you played the game on Saturday. And obviously the post-match was a big issue too. There, you all have beers afterwards and mix with the opposition. And that was it was a social networking type of opportunity for a youngster. If you were a decent rugby player, you had a good opportunity of getting a job. If you're a doctor and lawyer, you would get easy access to jobs. And if you were in the sales or marketing, then there'd be a vehicle, sales business or insurance or whatever. That you'd always find an ability. You'd have an ability to get a job through sport and through networking. As to whether it was more dangerous, it's difficult to say because the ball was in play so much less in those days. If you had to take the ball in play time in the 70s and 80s, you'd be amazed. It's only around about 20 minutes out of 80 because people used to, you'd have a crack, but if they knocked the ball on, guys would walk to the scrum, they'd go down, the ball would be put in quickly, but then they would kick it out, you'd walk to the line out, and the ball was out of play way more than it was in play. And now, if you look at, but then you had many more brawls, you had many more fights. You had to watch out what was going on behind you. If you were on the ground, you were allowed to be raked. I mean, raking was part of the game. I played in 76 against the All Blacks. They took the shirt completely off my back. I tackled their number 8, and their whole pack just went over. And that was just part and parcel. You got churned out the back, and you had huge wheels down the back. So it was, in that sense, dangerous, but not as, I don't think, quite as physically difficult to handle as it is nowadays. So what's happened nowadays is that the ball in play is now up to 40 minutes. So you're almost playing double the amount of time with the ball in play. Every single player is expected to tackle, and the phases go on far longer. So you have 15 phases. In those 15 phases, you might have 30 or 40 tackles between guys of over 105 kilos. The centers are 105 kilos, and your lock is expected to tackle him, and he's 125. So it's 105. Running at 11 seconds against 125 running at 12 seconds, the impact is much bigger. So you're getting so many more injuries. And that's, in that sense, the modern game is harder, I think, than the game I played. But in terms of getting punched or getting hit or getting trampled on or getting tackled high, I mean, it has been sanitized and cleaned up. But all you've got to do is just go and watch a practice. Go and watch a game where the Stormers are preparing for a game on Saturday, or the Bulls are preparing, or the Lions, and watch a defense session. And you won't tell me that it's got softer. No ways, boy. It is unbelievably physical. And it is a fact that one guy will get a serious injury during a season. I mean, there are usually 30 injuries in a season to a squad of players, and they'll be from cruciate knee ligaments, broken arms, elbows, shoulders. There'll be contact injuries because the game is so fast and so tough at the moment.
Yeah, and of course the conditioning is
exceptional.
Yeah. But let's just go back to your career. You were always there. You were always this combative, very talented eighth man, struggling for a position in a really tough Western Province team. Eventually you prevailed. There was also limited opportunities to play international rugby, but you did manage to sneak in, unfortunately. I think in today's terms you would have been a fixture, and the numbers would be in...
I think, as I said, I was playing at a time, I played probably about, 15 games for Western Province between 76. My first was in 76. I played probably 7 or 8 in 77, and the same in 77 and 78. Those were when I fitted in for Jan Boland, etc. So I was still quite young, 20, 21. Then I went overseas and I studied overseas at university. So I missed out on 80 and 81, and that was when the Springboks went on tour to New Zealand in that demonstration tour. And I was playing over in England, and then I came back in 82. And immediately started playing. I had been playing for UCT, and then I moved to Villages. And Morné du Plessis had retired right at that. He didn't go on that tour to New Zealand in 81. So there was a gap at number 8, and Rob Lowe was playing there, and he was a Springbok, obviously. But he had an ability to play open side flanker, and we had Tian Stoffberg as the blind side flanker. So in a way, I think what they thought, they'd move Rob from number 8 to open side flanker and got me in at number 8. And so in 1982, I started the first game for Western Province, and then I went right through 82, 83, 84, 85, and left for France in 85. But we won those four Currie Cups. I was injured unfortunately for the 85 final, just before I did my cruciate ligaments. But played in the other 3, and we had a really successful run. So that was a very strong Western Province side. But during that time, no one came over in 82, no one came over in 83. In 84, England came over, and I was in the Springbok final trial A team, and Flip van der Merwe stood on my ear, and I had 52 stitches where they had to put my ear back, and I was out. I missed out on those 2 test matches, which was a hell of a pity. And luckily then a South American side came at the end of 1984 on a tour, and Hugo Porter and that Argentinian side was the base. It was basically the Argentine side, but because of apartheid, they had to call themselves a South American side because they took 2 Chileans and I think maybe a Uruguayan or someone like that just to mix it up. And we played as Springboks, and luckily I got 2 test match caps then. But when you consider now, there are 13, 14 tests a year, if in that 4-year period when I was in a very strong Western Province side with very good other Springbok players, I would have had an opportunity to play more test matches, there's no question. But it doesn't matter. I really felt that at that time, I was at the top of my game and also the top of South Africa's rugby. Western Province was the strongest. We played World 15s for Western Province and we beat them by 30, 40 points.
Yeah.
We were very, very strong in those days.
I do sadly remember how strong Western Province were. And then Nick, you started to tell us that you went overseas.
Yeah. So my father was he was an Oxford graduate. He'd post the Second World War, they gave people who'd qualified, got A levels, they paid for them to go to a university of their choice, and he chose Oxford, and he became a cricket blue and a squash blue, and then came over in education, came over to South Africa. But I remember him saying to me when I was at UCT, it'd be great if you had an opportunity to go over and play for Oxford. It'll be a completely different experience for you. And it was a wonderful opportunity. I managed to get a bursary through UCT, and because obviously as a school teacher he couldn't afford to send me. But I had 2 years over there, so I had from 70. You go up they call it go up to Oxford. You go to Oxford in September of 79 to 80, and then I did 80 to 81. So I did those 2 years and captained Oxford and got a blue, and also played some cricket there, which was fantastic. So it was a wonderful opportunity. And but all the time I was over there and playing rugby over there, I was looking at what was happening in South Africa, seeing that Springbok tour to New Zealand. I listened to it on, at 4 a.m. in the morning to the test matches, and obviously followed it. And my whole career had been based on becoming a Springbok. So as soon as I graduated, I came back to South Africa and did my best to get to the top. As I said, unfortunately far more for players like Dani Gerber and Karel du Plessis and these magnificent world-class rugby players, Tian Stoffberg, Rob Lowe, Henning van Asvieg, and we had Hempies de Tooy. They were such good players, and yet because of the politics of South Africa at the time, deprived of many international caps. So I left then in 1985 to go to France. I was 28 years old, and I'd already achieved what I wanted to in South Africa. And then in 1986, funny enough, the Cavaliers came. But I was so disappointed in 1984. The 1985 international schedule was New Zealand coming over and France coming over, and I would have loved to have played against those two teams, and both were cancelled. So I just thought, listen, it's no good hanging around in the hope that, and I left for overseas, which was the best thing I could ever have done. I mean, it was a brilliant. It was an opportunity from a work perspective that. I ran a French bistro for 5 years as a player coach. It was a great experience, and then went up to Paris, player coach of a team up in Paris. So for 9 years I lived. Both my children were born over there. I was able to save, an appreciable amount of money, buy a house when I got back to Cape Town. So had a good financial start to life because of that decision to leave.
Yeah, and of course that started you down the road.
Yeah.
While you were in France, because now suddenly you were not only, I think what people have to appreciate was just at the time people were starting to travel to play rugby.
Yeah.
There was, I remember Nas Buerta and a few others going to Italy, and then you found yourself in France, and then moved on to including in your portfolio coaching.
Yeah, so when I went over, I was a player coach, and obviously I just felt, well, if you're a captain, you can lead on the field. So I had a good 5 years with this St. Claude side, and saved up a good deal of money. The whole point of going over there was financial. If I didn't know that I was going to be able to save a good deal more than if I stayed in South Africa, I wouldn't have gone. It was a financial decision to go. And then because it was so lucrative, even though rugby was amateur there, they gave you a position. So I was given this French bistro to run. I had a negligible rent to have to pay, and all the profits accrued to me. So I just, if the harder I worked, the more money I made, and the better the team did, the more people came in to talk about rugby into my pub, you know.
Yeah.
So it was really a fantastic opportunity. And then when I went to Paris, we hadn't obviously, it's sort of southeast of France. We hadn't had a chance to spend time in the capital. And when I was about to come home, I was called by another second division club, and they said, please come and be player coach of our team. And I spent another 4 years, so I was about 36 when I stopped. 1993. I was contacted by a guy, Rob van der Valk, who's become a very good friend of mine, and he was in charge of False Bay, and he said, listen, we've seen what you've done with those two teams over there. We don't want you to play. We've got players here, but we'd love you to coach. And it was quite an interesting then movement from being a player coach, where you're on the field, you're in contact with your players all the time. So you do coach, you become a better and better coach as you become a less good player, because you start feeling the knocks when you're about 35, 36, but you start coaching better, so the other players become better around you. So we managed to get some good success. I took both of those two second division teams to the first division. And then when I came back to Cape Town, I thought, well, now I'm going to have to get into the proper workspace. And my sister had an advertising agency, and I worked with her for 2 years. But for those 2 years, I coached False Bay, and False Bay, we did really well. So we managed to beat Stellenbosch. At Stellenbosch, we came second in the league. And then, of course, 1995, rugby turned professional. So my timing was ideal. Having been a player, I started coaching from 94 to 95, coaching a club side. And suddenly, all rugby, international rugby, turned professional, so they were allowed to pay coaches and allowed to pay players. And that was when Boland contacted me, and I went and coached Boland for a couple of years, did well with them. And when the opportunity came to coach the Springboks, you know, it was unbelievable. I think I was 38, I just turned 40. So very young, and you consider I was playing 4 years before, you know, so suddenly 2 years with False Bay, 2 years with Boland, and suddenly you get the opportunity to coach your country's national side. It was a big step up. You know, a lot of the guys that I was coaching, 33, 32, 33, and I was 40. I was only 7 years older than them. But it was a fantastic opportunity. You couldn't turn it down, and I loved the experience.
And you did a hell of a job. And for those that maybe are not up to speed, you at the time held the world record for the number of consecutive wins.
Yeah, we tied with New Zealand. There were 17. New Zealand had 17 consecutive wins between, I think it was 65 and 1970. And we in 18 months had 17 wins. So you can imagine how much more international games you played. So in fact, one game was with Carl du Plessis against Australia in Pretoria. They played really well. They won by 60 points to 30. But when they appointed me, we had 16 in a row, and lost obviously very unfortunately to England at the end of '98. But we went on a really good run, and I didn't have to change the team much. Gary Teichmann was a fantastic captain, but I had world-class players. If you picked a world team in 1997, end of 97, 98, I reckon we would have got 7 or 8 players in a world 15 at least. With Ostirant, I go through Ostirant, Mark Andrews, Andre Venter, Gary Teichmann, maybe Rassie Erasmus in the pack of forwards. In the back line, Joost definitely, Henry Honeyball definitely. We had Andre Snyman and Peter Muller in the centre. You had Stefan de Blanche, Peter Rousseau, and Percy Montgomery. I mean, we would have got 3 or 4 of the backline players in as well. So that was a fantastic team. And when we won the Tri-Nations here, funny enough, in Joburg, we beat Australia in that sort of final game. We'd beaten everyone in the world, both home and away. Those top 8 teams in the world. So we'd beaten New Zealand home and away, Australia home and away, England home and away, France 2 games away. All our biggest opponents we'd beaten home and away. And so at that point, I think I can confident, even though there wasn't a World Cup to play, in 1998, that team was the best team in the world.
And then, of course, one of the games was that classic in Durban.
Yeah.
Which I've got to tell you a story about that classic game in Durban. At the time, it was in 1998, if I'm not mistaken. Right. And the Springboks were 20 points down.
23-5 we were down.
Down against New Zealand.
Yeah.
And it was into the second half.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you, my story was that I was living and working in England, and it was back in the days when you still had videotapes, right? So I was going on a trip, family holiday, because it was the middle of the UK summer. We were going to Disneyland in America, and I'd set my video recorder to record the test because we left the morning of the test, and of course, you go to America, and of course in Disneyland they aren't exactly reporting on the rugby. And I came back about 10 days later, and you get busy with the normal sort of stuff, and eventually, must have been close on 2 weeks after this game. I had no idea what was going on. I started watching the video, and when it gets to 23-5, I have to go out and go. So another 2 days elapsed, right? This is now, for a rugby fan, this is now weeks after the game. Until I was, let me watch the end of the game, see how badly we lost. And suddenly there's this unbelievable fight back, and I'm screaming in my lounge weeks after the game's been played. Right. And only to find, because South Africa then, or the Springbok team, scored 3 tries, if I'm not mistaken, including that one with James Dalton, where he ripped
it out of Andrew Aiken's hands. Andrew Aiken was trying to score the try, and Dalton said, no, I'm going to score this try. And, I don't know whether he dropped it or he didn't, but the ref awarded the try, and that was it. But, the very interesting parts of that game were, we actually didn't have to win that game to win the Tri-Nations. It was Australia, our biggest opponents in '98. And I think the team itself probably thought, they held back a little bit in the first half because they didn't want to get injured. The guys wanted to play that final. And at halftime, I went in and said, listen, guys, you lose this game as badly as we're losing now, I won't pick you. I've got guys who are dying to play for the Springboks, and I'll put them in against. I'm not playing a team that's holding back here. You get out there and perform. And there was a strange thing that happened. I made a lot of substitutions, which you weren't allowed to in those days. You weren't allowed to make substitutions, tactical substitutions. I had to get guys off injured. So we had a signal to a player that he had to come off, and the injury would be a neck injury or a groin injury. They're very hard to test those injuries. So, I made 4 or 5 changes, and on the field that day came Franco Smith, and at centre, Andrew Aiken came on, Ollie Leroux came on, Skinstad came on. There were about 5 or 6 key guys who got a bit of energy going. And then we decided with 20 minutes to go that we just wouldn't kick. We were just going to have a full go, run everything. Inside our 22, we had a tap penalty. We tapped and went. If we marked and we got the mark, tap and go. Only time, if we got a penalty and we could kick it in the corner, we kicked it in the corner. We scored 2 tries from lineouts, a driving maul, and also Joost, a lovely dummy, and went over and scored. And then through some phase play, Bob Skinstad scored, and suddenly, they were protecting a lead, and we were attacking all the time. And the combination of a team being negative, very unusual for New Zealand, but they became negative in their mindset, were kicking everything away, and a South African side which had nothing to lose would just have a full go. I've spoken to a number of people from Durban who left the game with 10 minutes to go. They left. They said, we can't win this game.
They go to Disneyland.
And they just heard, but they heard the roar, and they said, the All Blacks must have scored again, And then they heard another roar 5 minutes later. And then they tried to get back in, but they weren't allowed to. They'd left. So they missed the most, it's historically, the All Blacks have never, ever ceded a lead like that in the history of the game. They've never, ever been 18 points ahead and lost the game, in the second half. So it was an extraordinary performance by the players, and a huge amount of self-belief when they got it right. They really could play. So it was a very, a very satisfactory win, because New Zealand they'd had the wood over us for a very long period of time, and so to beat them in New Zealand, which with that great try through Peter Rousseau going over. And then to beat them at home when they were up by 23 points to 5, to beat Australia twice, go through the Tri-Nations unbeaten, huge confidence boost for the team.
Yeah, and then of course, as usual in South African rugby, well, certainly there seemed to be 2 issues that came up. There was a build-up to the '99 World Cup.
Yeah.
We were the reigning champions at that point. We've got this magnificent record. And you're going to go into that tournament almost as hotshot favourites.
Yeah.
Tell
I'll take
us.
a lot of blame for that. It was interesting. What happens to any Springbok coach is, when you're winning, it's like you're just surfing the wave. It's everything you say is gospel. You can't do anything wrong. Everyone thinks you're a genius. And then it just takes one loss.
Yeah.
Funny, in this country, it doesn't take 3 or 4 or 5, it takes one loss. And then they start saying why, and that's got to be something to do with the coach, So you put under a tremendous amount of pressure. And what happened in 99 was, we had a few injuries to key players. I mean, Joost was injured, and so was Henry Honeyball. Gary was carrying a lot of injuries, even though he played the games. He was carrying a lot of injuries in the Tri-Nations games that year. And we lost some games, and we lost some games quite badly. We lost 28-0 to Australia. We lost away from home. I was trying out a few combinations which didn't work, and I was under pressure. And when you're under pressure, you don't make good decisions, And I was trying to try to be clear in my mind, making a rugby decision on the quality of player I needed going into the World Cup. What would the perfect team be? Each individual doing his job. What can he bring to the side? And my team. In my mind, I thought to myself, I wonder if Gary's going to be able to get into the side, because it's Andre Venter and Rassie. Bob Skinsa's pushing and pushing. He'd had a bad knee injury, but the guy had said he's going to come back fine. And of course, he didn't. He wasn't able to. His real strength was the ability to swerve. And with the injury he had to his leg, he was able to run fast in a straight line, but he lost his ability to beat players with that swerving motion of his. So, I took a really poor decision, which I've apologized for, not only to Gary Teichmann, but also to the South African public. The worst point of it was you shouldn't take into account just the rugby, the ability on the rugby field. You've got to take into account the leadership issues, and Gary, the one thing Gary had was tremendous respect from all the players in the team. As a player, they really respected him. He'd be the first guy to take an up and under. He'd be the first guy to hit a ruck. He'd be the first guy to carry it up. If there was a tough thing to do, Gary would do it. And that the Afrikaner guys, they really respect. They don't like a talking captain, Afrikaans guys. They like a doing captain. So a guy who does what he says, they'll follow. And that was really important in the team. He could chat to the English guys, so your Dick Muirs and James Smalls, James Daltons, Adrian Garvey, Mark Andrews, they really liked him. But the Afrikaans guys respected him because of his abilities on the field. So by dropping the captain, for what I thought were clear rugby reasons, i.e. just on the field reasons, I completely misjudged the effect the lack of his leadership was going to have on the other 14 players. And it was unbelievable. I mean, just incredibly marked how insecure those guys got. I actually asked Rassie Erasmus to be captain, and he turned it down. He felt he was too young, and he supported, to his credit, he supported Gary, and he wanted Gary to go to the World Cup. And he said, listen, I don't want to do it. It's too early for me, and I don't think I'm the right guy. And then the other guy was Joost van der Westhuizen, who had a lot of experience as captain with the Bulls. So I went with Joost, but it wasn't the same. There's no question. And we got to the semi-finals. We were really in a good position to win that semi-final. And I think with good leadership on the field, really good leadership, calm, controlled, organized leadership, which Gary would have provided, I think we could have won that semi-final. And if we'd won that semi-final against Australia, which it was essentially the final, we were the best two teams there. If we'd won that game, we would have beaten France comfortably in the final. So I take full responsibility for that mistake.
There's also sort of two other things that I'm going to argue in defence of Nick Mallett. There were two things. Number one, you were unbelievably unlucky in that Australia loss.
Well,
right, which everybody kind of forgets about. You got Stephen Larkham, who wasn't a fly half. He was a retreaded fullback with bad feet. Kicking his one and only drop goal from 45 meters. I mean, really, that was just an absolute hard, bitter pill for all of us to swallow. And then there's another thing, and we're gonna really go into this. If we can go, we might as well talk about it now. There seems to be. There's a hard part, rugby, which has become so defined by the World Cups. It's almost like you're playing for a couple of years, play. This matters, but not that much. And because we don't have those test series anymore, it's become about the World Cup. Right? And it seems like exactly what happened to New Zealand in the build-up to 2019 World Cup. You're the best team, you've got a wonderful squad, but it's hard to identify your 15 best players,
that's right.
or to nail down your exact tactics.
Yeah.
You know, it sort of seems to me that it's and this is just as an observer, as an avid spectator. It's easy to sort of build up to something, but it's harder to maintain.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely.
And you were in the maintenance thing because you had two such wonderful years building up.
No, that's very perceptive of you, in fact, and I didn't want to use that as an excuse. But there is no question that you have to reinvent yourself as a coach, and reinvent the team, and reinvent the story, and reinvent your goals on a regular basis. You can't just say, I got it right, look at us, we're doing so well. There's only way, when you're at the top, there's only one other way, and that's down. You know? And in order to stay at the top, you've got to do what you did at the initial period, which was motivate and inspire those guys to play the best they possibly can. So when they're at the top, you've got to still continue to change the dialogue. And I think what I should have done, I should have sat down with the team leaders, which would have been way before any other coach ever did it in the world. You know, now, you know, you have your leaders, you have your, you know, the debates about selection with those team leaders, and your assistant coaches play a big role. I would have sat them down and said, guys, I think, you know, going into that 98 at the end of the year tour, we went on 98. I said I should have got their buy-in that we would rotate. No one rotated in those days. It was always you play your best team and you play them until you lose, and then you drop the players because we lost. Now, that didn't make sense to me. I'd say if you've got these keen other guys wanting to knock at the door, and you've got some tired older guys who need a break, surely it's a good idea to not change the whole team, but make 5 or 6 changes every single Saturday. So you play one team against Wales, slightly different Scotland, slightly different Ireland, slightly different against England, but freshen it up all the time. But I had to get the players buy-in to do that. You can't just stand there and say, this is what I'm going to do. And the players say, well, I want to get, I've got so many test caps, and why are you dropping me? Because in those days, if you didn't play, it was dropping. And I didn't have the intelligence at the time to sit them down and get the buy-in prior to the tour and say, this is going to suit you all, guys. You're going to be better for it in 99 World Cup here. Injuries, you get fewer injuries. You know, a guy like Gary, and I don't defend myself when I say this, but he'd had, out of 30, he played 3 years of rugby, 36 months of rugby, in which he only had 3 months break. And he played Currie Cup, he played Super Rugby, he played every test match. So from 97, 98, 99, he was in the Springbok side, in the Natal side as captain. Every single Saturday he was playing. Now, no one can take that sort of bashing, it's just cumulative injuries hit you. So that whole freshening up is what people do now. But I would have done it, I would have been the first guy to do it. But I didn't have the, as I said, the emotional intelligence to talk to the players, get their buy-in, and then I think it might have helped. It might have helped, certainly Gary, get to the World Cup, and it might have helped a lot of our players be a little bit better, because through competition within the group, it makes everyone, keeps everyone sharp, doesn't it? If the 5 or 6 guys you've put in, they play well, it's not that you've dropped the guy who was there. He's going to play the next weekend, but in the back of his mind, he says, geez, that guy, like Andrew Aiken, he played really well. So Rassie was on his toes every time he had to play.
Yeah,
it's important.
There isn't a potential downside to that tactic, though, which I mean, if overdone. I thought New Zealand got it very wrong in the build-up to the last World Cup.
Because they didn't know
eventually they didn't know who their best 15 were. And I said to everybody that when I had this conversation, saying I think that the only thing I know for sure about the 2019 World Cup is that New Zealand won't win it. Everybody thought I was stark raving mad, only because it felt to me that they had no idea who their best 15 is.
Absolutely.
Now, in South Africa, if one had to say, after 2003, England were that team that were due for the fall. They took a fall in 2007. South Africa, to a degree, was the team after 2007, and we took, that team was strong in 2008, 9.
Yes, it was.
We started to misfire around just at the wrong time, and then lost the World Cup and so on.
New Zealand managed it 2011, 2015. I think that was an outstanding effort.
It was an outstanding
good leaders,
effort.
Good players. They got the culture of player leadership through Hansen and obviously
And things do tend to go New Zealand's way. I mean, it's a game where the ball's meant to bounce oddly for everybody, but it does seem to bounce quite well for them because, you know, I thought that our team in 2011, which was largely the 2007 World Cup winning team,
side.
at their, you would say almost statistically at a better team. And then you had this refereeing issue that wouldn't, I doubt if it would happen today. You know?
No, I mean, there were so many errors in that game. But interesting, a side story around that game was that Rassie was invited as a consultant on that to that team. Peter de Villiers was the coach. And
this was in 2011.
This was in 2011, and in 2011. And he said just before the game in the quarterfinal against Australia,
yes.
He said to John Smith, he said, don't you think we should have a drop goal strategy here? And apparently the leaders in the team said, no, we don't need a drop goal strategy. We're going to smash Australia today. So you've got to be careful with giving players too much say in the way in which the game's going to be played. It's a balance between coaching and giving them directions about what they should do, and the players accepting it and also bringing what they can do, what they feel they're best at, to the recipe. And the drop goal strategy in a World Cup is, I mean, every team should have one. Every single team should have one. It just goes Joel Stransky in '95, Johnny Wilkinson in 2003. Dan Carter's drop when they were down to 14 men in the semi-final against South Africa in 2015. Yanni de Beer's 5 drop goals against England.
Yeah.
I mean, there is just drop goals win you World Cups. So, to say we don't need a drop goal strategy, the facts are very damning on the players there, because for 26 minutes in that second half, in that quarterfinal, we played in their half. 26 minutes we had opportunities 40 meters from their line, up to 20 meters from their line, to kick a drop goal. The only person who tried a drop goal the whole day was Lambie in the 78th minute. And we had the best drop goal kicker in South Africa right next to him, Morné Steyn. He didn't try one drop goal the whole game. And you know what the score we lost the game? 11-9. We lost by 2 points. You know, and the referee never gave us a penalty the whole game. So you take the ref out of the game when you kick a drop. He can't deny you a drop goal. He can deny you a penalty, which that guy did the whole game, but he cannot deny you a drop goal. We decided to do that against England in that game against England, because their defence was very good. They had a good pack of forwards, and we weren't firing in the back line. And as a team, we discussed it, and I remember Brendan Fenter sat with me and we chatted about Yanni de Beer, and he said Yanni's a great drop goal kicker. So we collectively put in a strategy which allowed Yanni, whenever he felt he was in a position to kick a drop goal, he just called the move, which from a line-out was just called Bok, and from a line-out to a scrum, we set it up with the centre through the midfield. We brought a forward round the corner to take it in front of the poles, pass from here straight back, and Yanni de Beer just slotted the drop. So we have 5 drop goals, never been done before.
Yeah.
And we just took that game away from England. And we took it away from the referee, who wasn't refereeing the game fairly, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So you have to have that. You have to have that drop goal strategy in a World Cup, in any World Cup, in any Test match you play. You've got to have an ability to score 3 points without depending on the referee to give it to you.
Now, Nick, we've got to look forward, because here we are in 2023. There's a World Cup year. South Africa, the reigning champions. It's obviously been a tortured 4 years just in general, because no real proper, the schedules were completely destroyed because of COVID. But we did manage to prevail, and it seems like a team that always feels like it may be on the verge of a loss. But if we look at what we did against the British Lions, we came back. We've got some really solid players. We've spoken a lot about teams being a little bit overextended when it gets to the World Cup. It feels, where do you put South Africa at the moment?
I would be very confident about our ability to defend our title, were it not for the fact that we've angered World Rugby through comments about referees. There's no question that you go into a World Cup, you have to be looked at by the referees as a fair a team playing the right style of rugby, and who handle the referees in a positive and polite way. Now, unfortunately, we won. Listen, there's no question we won the British Lions series because of intervention by Rassie Erasmus as director of rugby with that video, put pressure on the referee. The second test, we were refereed far better, and the third test, far better than we were in the first. So the goal was achieved. But unfortunately, what's a result of that has been that the referees have circled their wagons and they've said, South Africa's director of rugby has criticized us on social media. If this is allowed to go further, we are all going to be refereeing South Africa one day. Is every single time after every test match that South Africa plays and they lose, are there going to be 20 social media clips of our mistakes? We all make mistakes, but if every single coach does this, it's just going to make this is what they will be saying. I know it's going to make the game unrefereeable. No one's going to go and referee. No one wants to have, themselves insulted on social media by passionate supporters because of decisions they've made on the field that might be errors, but they're human errors. So I think if this next period, this next 9 months for me is absolutely critical to our success, not because of our players, but because of the conduct of the people who are responsible for our rugby, which are Rassie Erasmus, Jacques Nienaber, and Siya Kolisi. I can say without a shadow of doubt that Jacques Nienaber and Siya Kolisi will handle referees and post-match interviews and on-the-field decisions really well, because they are different personalities from Rassie. I'm not criticizing. I'm much more like Rassie. I'm a much more emotional person. I get incredibly upset when I see unfairness, and so I tend to I was as a coach much more like him, instinctively angry when things went against us. I think that a guy like Jacques is a little bit more removed from that. He's still passionate, but a little bit more removed, and can come out with more clarity and more perspective after a game, as can Siya. And I think if Rassie stays out the media, stays out of social media in particular, do his job as director of rugby, which he's very, very good at. He's a wonderful coach. I use the example of David Nusifora. Probably no one who's listening to this podcast will ever have heard of him. But he happens to be the director of rugby of Ireland, and you've never ever heard, they're seeded number one in the world. You've never heard him give a media conference. You've never heard him put out a tweet about criticizing the times when Ireland might have lost a test match. So, get on the right side of the referees. Otherwise, we have no chance of winning that quarterfinal. We're playing the quarterfinal either against New Zealand or France. We have to have a referee who goes into that game saying, I'm going to referee the rugby. I'm not going to referee the fact that our rugby referees have been undermined by the director of rugby of South Africa, and we're playing New Zealand. They've never undermined us. Therefore, I'm going to look a little bit closer to South Africa than I'm going to look to New Zealand. It just requires a penalty count of 12-8 against us to make it very difficult to win that game. So that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that it's the off-the-field issues that I'm more concerned about than on-the-field issues. We have a fantastic group of players. Probably got the two best front fives in the world. If everyone stays fit and strong, we've got two brilliant front rows, whether it's Trevor Nyakani and Oxenche and Bongi and Manambi who start, and you bring on Kitsoff and Marks and Malherbe. No other team can put in guys of that quality to start. We can actually replace with as good if we're lucky enough to get Snyman back. I mean, he's a world-class lock with Lot de Jager, Ebenet Smith, best locks in the world, those two guys. So fantastic front five. Mostert, you can play blindside flank and play lock. You've got Peter Steph de Toy, you can play lock and blindside flank. We've just got so many good players.
Yeah.
In addition, we've introduced on this Northern Hemisphere tour a counter-attacking system that is very dangerous, utilizing the pace and the strengths of our players who aren't as big but have got great feet. So I'm very, very confident that our team has the quality to beat anyone in the world and to defend our crown, but we really need a referee in this quarterfinals, semi-finals and finals to look kindly upon us. If they look kindly upon us, I can assure you we have a very good chance.
And the one area that we need a bit of intervention and a bit of help from above is that fly half.
Yes, I think in that position, not only has Pollard had numerous injuries and is battling to get back to form, although he always seems around the World Cup to be fit enough to play. So I'm hoping that he'll be fine. But the pressure that is going to be put on him by Damian Willemse, by perhaps Amani Lubbock, perhaps I doubt Elton Jantjies will get back in the mix. I'm not sure. For his sake, from a rugby point of view, I really hope he does. But he's always been the backup to Pollard. But I just think, since he's been stood down, they've been moved. There's movement from other players who provide different talents. I mean, Damian Willemse is like a Henry Honeyball on defence. So if you're wanting to go in with two similar fly-halves who don't, I mean, he tackles far better than Pollard does. I mean, Pollard misses tackles. I can show you many clips where he misses tackles. So he's a big physical player, but he's not the best tackler in the world, whereas Damian Willemse does not miss tackles. So you've got a guy in that position who can distribute, he can kick, he will defend for his life, and the players around him love having him there. So I'm not too nervous.
In that case, we just need to resolve the kicking conundrum.
Exactly.
Nick, I want to just close off with your view. It's obviously been a fantastic conversation, and we hope to do more of this. But tell me about the move away from Super Rugby, which was showing the cracks were deep going into COVID. That then split the whole world wide open, and we then threw our lot in with the Northern Hemisphere, right?
I do think that Super Rugby was at its best when there were only 12 teams. Once we expanded it to 16 and then had two pools and Japan was involved and we got Argentina. I just thought it got a little bit complicated then. I thought tired, and from a South African point of view, the travel there's no question that it really, really is a pain. It's very difficult. It's not. We're traveling now to the north and the south, and that's also difficult, but it's on the same timeline, and it's the timeline difference that matters. It's not the length of time that you travel up and down. It's sitting in a chair is the same wherever you're going, but it's getting there, and you think it's midnight, and it's 12 in the middle of the day. It's just so difficult for your body to readjust, and it's difficult when you go for 4 weeks. So the guys in every single Super Rugby franchise were going for 4 weeks. Then they were coming back. Then they'd make the quarterfinals or the semi-finals. They'd have to go back there. Then they'd come back if they lost the game. And suddenly they're playing a Tri-Nations. And now you're doing another trip over there. And you're including now Argentina. So, the money was down there. We were incorporated in that Southern Hemisphere competition. The quality of the rugby was absolutely outstanding when it was, I thought, 12 teams. I thought 5. What was it? 3, 4, and 5 or something like that. I think it was 3, 4, and...
it was exactly 3, 4, and 5.
So I thought then it was at its best. But going north has got big advantages. There's no question that rugby is supported more in Europe than it is anywhere else in the world. You know that even our viewership, TV viewership in South Africa, was double the combined viewership of New Zealand and Australia together.
Wow.
So whatever their viewership was, double it, our viewership on its own was more than theirs. You go to England, that's not the same. England watch rugby, boy. They go to the games and they watch rugby. France go to games and they watch on television. And it's supported in Wales, in Scotland, in Ireland. It's a very powerful sport and brand in Europe. So we are joining a powerful brand which is a growing brand there. The one in the Southern Hemisphere, to my mind, the rugby was outstanding, but still tailing off. And in the north, possibly not as tough, but which is not bad for South Africa because it allows us to start winning competitions. Stormers have already won one. Sharks should go quite a long way in the European Cup, the Heineken Cup. So I don't think it's a bad thing, and I think from a financial point of view, it's going to be beneficial to South African rugby.
Nick, it's been wonderful having you here today and talking rugby on State of the Nation Sport. Please, if you've enjoyed this, please subscribe to our channel. It's been wonderful. We'll be having more interviews like that. So, Nick, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for the opportunity, man.
It's been
wonderful.
A real pleasure.
Thank you so much,
Nick. And thank you to everybody who's joined us today.